FORA.tv. The world is thinking.
I wanted to take a moment to look at this with a bit of clarity. Obviously, I think we're dealing here with a panic, whether it's steroid in general or just a moral panic. I should say steroids in particular or a moral panic in general. The fact of the matter is, I think there are times when we seem to lose our perspective and see things as being much more, we exaggerate these situations much more than is necessary, not to mention healthy in the most sort of sociological sense. The overriding contention that sport has gotten out of hand to the point of becoming a menace of some sort or another has become a chief element of concern in these earliest days of the 21st century. Critics cite dozens of incidents involving high-profile athletes as well as others connected to sport as evidence that a perceived overall decline in values has struck sport with a vengeance, leading to assumptions, as rarely heard before, that sport is more a contributor than a mere reflection of an overarching degree of moral decay nationwide. A well-traveled avenue of exploration that traverses such austere contemporary sport criticism is whether sport in its most fundamental essence remains capable of molding young actors into a responsible citizenry. Indeed, many have fomented a connection between the behavior of modern athletes and the messages thought to reach young minds. As a nation founded on certain underlying principles of both action and contemplation, Americans have grown quite sensitive to the notion that it is the responsibility of older generations to both instruct and reproduce accepted and acceptable behavior across the board, a conceptual rendering that has been expanded into the modern construct of the role model, which is often bounded to the similar precept of mentoring. At the root of this role modeling construct is the notion that turn-of-the-century youth live in increasingly untenable surroundings and are exposed to dangers and temptations more so now than at any other time in modern memory. That these assessments often contradict statistical representation is supported in most cases, but what remains in spite of the numbers is the impulse to equate the modern world as an incubator for hazard and childhood as an increasingly pathological stage of the life cycle, a phase thought to be exceedingly vulnerable to a rash of contemporary maladies of both physical and psychological significance. That this line of inquiry has the potential to place adults on rather uneven footing seems wholly besides the point here. To be sure, adult behavior in such a climate is increasingly on display and exposed to scrutiny by a mass of external sources. Nevertheless, the investment in this approach is inestimable, and in many ways, sport's perceived inability to keep pace with modern virtues has impacted the burgeoning role model debate in such a way as to both hasten and widen the gap between contemporary sport and other ideals relative to behavior and similarly related themes. Indeed, matters such as the mass reevaluation of coaching techniques, an emphasis on the acquisition of self-esteem, which underscores a larger drive toward the importance placed on providing a positive sport experience, or continued anxieties concerning on and off field violence amidst a so-conceived demise of sportsmanship can all be viewed with equal clarity through this role model construct. And is in this context, carelessness or even recklessness as expressed through the framework of competitive sport gives further indication that behaviors revealed within the athletic domain are no longer compatible with contemporary values, offering instead that sport must either be reformed through the efforts of activists wielding reasonable demands or removed from its pedestal as one of America's most esteemed institutions. The key element that I would like to explore further through this evening is this notion that really is as old as American sport itself, which comes down to this. Sport in America has always meant something, or I should say, sport in America has always had to mean something, whether it was turning immigrants into American citizens, which is the origins of sport in America, or whether it is about experiences, wholesome experiences for our children. The one thread that continues forward from the 19th century through the present is this notion that sport has to mean something. Whether it means something or not, or whether it means something important or not, that is subject to debate. But at a time when so few of our traditional institutions hold any sway within the populace, it falls to such seemingly trivial notions such as competitive sport to carry the burden of this notion of meaning, how we define ourselves. And you take it into this context, and what begins to happen is we see an exaggeration of isolated incidents, or we see patterns emerging, or we believe we see patterns emerging where they may or may not. But what happens is we tend to get this sense of decay that becomes much more unpalatable when it comes from something as seemingly trivial and popular as sport. And so when we come together under the auspices of can athletes remain role models, the chief question that I have in my mind is, well, when did we decide that athletes were role models in the first place? And at what point are we willing to sell our souls down that river? Because that is a very deep and troublesome point. And I'll go ahead and stop there.